Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Michael, and I will be delivering this workshop on speed reading. But before we do so, just to show you where I am on Earth. I'm in Morocco, just behind that red dot. Now that we've had our compulsory opening visual, I'd like to go to the heart of today's topic, which is speed reading. Speed reading requires some basic grammar knowledge, but also some basic understandings of pronunciation. Speed reading is very useful to improve the delivery. As interpreters, it is important that our message is well presented and we have nothing but our voice to do so. So, in more detail, speed reading is defined as reading very accurately a text out loud. And as such, it is an excellent way to sharpen your delivery. And of course, this does involve breathing and language control as well. But the real focus here is shaping your delivery. You don't have to translate anything. You don't have to really know what the difference is between an adverb and a verb is, although it would help because it is very useful. But you don't have to know all the technical things, and you're just reading the target language. And therefore, you have the opportunity to focus on your delivery. So, speed reading involves both understanding and producing. To understand a text, we need to look beyond individual words to phrases, sentences, and paragraphs. Obviously, if as interpreters we translate at each word individually, no matter how fast, we still end up sounding like robots. So between words and phrases, these are the different levels in a message. We can have paragraphs, big pieces, sentences or smaller pieces. We have phrases that are smaller pieces still. Phrases are made of words, but between words and phrases, there are what I call semantic units. Other people might use a different terminology. The most Rather than trying to explain, I will illustrate with an example. The most basic semantic units are subject, verb, and object. For example, here in this sentence, the dog followed the boy. The dog is the subject. Followed in bold is the verb. The boy is the object. A semantic unit can also be a noun plus an adjective, such as a big boy. It can also be a verb plus an adverb, carefully followed. It can be a preposition, to the woods. It could also be a logical link, despite, because, but, and, of course, etc. So semantic units can be made of a single word, a combination of noun and adjective, a combination of different words. Whatever semantic unit you look at, a semantic unit, as I understand it, is an assembly of words which together create a partial or complete, but always understandable message. For example, if I go back to our basic semantic unit here, if I just say the, it's not understandable. Either partial or complete, but it's not understandable. It's clearly, whereas the dog is partial, but understandable. The dog, you know that there's a dog. If you just say the, it's not enough. Also, if you just choose dog by itself is not a semantic unit. Dog, we don't know if the dog is the object of something or the subject of the verb. We don't know what this dog is doing, where he is, anything. We just know dog. In and of itself, it is not understandable. However, the is not understandable and dog is not understandable. However, the dog is understandable. So therefore, the dog would be a simple semantic units. They cannot, semantic units can also be much more complicated, but this is just an introduction. The important thing is to understand that a semantic unit is an assembly of words which create a partial or complete but always understandable message. For example, the dog. Now, to deliver our reading, our voice must isolate the semantic units of the text to signpost the structure of the message. Now, signposting, again, rather than define, I give an example, would be using a structure such as first, second, finally. First, the participants debated the value of the motion. Secondly, questions were taken from members of the audience. Finally, a vote was called for. In delivering our reading, we must also render the oral punctuation, or in this case, another way of saying this would be signposting, the signposting of the message. Your tone must inform the listener where the sentence starts and ends, what are its main components, what contrasts or causal links are there between ideas, concepts, or declarations. I must, at this stage, warn you, control your breathing or it will control you. If you want to perform well in speed reading, you need to control your breathing. Performing well in speed reading without controlling breathing is like trying to swim without getting wet. It's theoretically possible, but it's not very practical. To improve in speed reading, you will need to seek perfection now. You aim today to perform well. You have to be exact. You have to be demanding. At this stage, if I'm doing my job well, you must be able to hear my muscles, the muscles of my mouth move. This is an essential part of speed reading, as it will help you deal in the booth when you are tired, when you are dealing with complex language. You don't have to worry about the mechanics because you have done hours and hours of speed reading and trained your muscles to perform well under pressure. That is what I mean by seek perfection now. To pronounce well, of course, you will have to articulate, but you will also have to use pauses and rising or falling intonation to separate, highlight, contrast, compare, inquire, and enumerate. I will now explain these concepts. I would like to start by asking a question. Why is there a comma here? Is this a correct choice on my part or incorrect choice? Well, this is called the Oxford comma. We are going to use this interesting question to generate a text which I have not yet seen, so that I can show you how universal the approach that we have chosen to understand the text and define semantic units will enable us to deliver a reading that is signposted. I will therefore ask an assistant to tell me more about the Oxford comma. So I'm going to copy the text here, and I'm going to go to the artificial intelligence of Google. There are other ones, you can try it with them. I'm going to start a new discussion, and because I want to be polite, it's an intelligence. He, she it or they deserve to be treated politely. So I will start by hi. And now will give, how can I help you today? Thank you. Please explain the Oxford comma. Now, I don't want a very long explanation, so I'm going to add in 300 words or less. Now, while it's doing that, I'm going to put my bar on the left and my notes here, keep my notes on the right, looking at semantic units. For example, subject, verb, and object. Now, let's look at the first sentence in Bart's response. Do not read it out loud, read it silently. So, in this sentence, please identify, if we want to find in this sentence the subject, the verb, and the object. Please identify in the first sentence, we need to first identify the first sentence. The first sentence is here because we have a full stop at the end here. I don't know if you can see the cursor. We have a full stop here. That is the end of the first sentence. In that sentence, we need to identify the central verb, the verb that separates the subject from the verb from the the verb which separates the subject from the object. The object here is a punctuation point that ignites passionate debate. And the subject here is the Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma. So now we have a basic breakdown of the first sentence into 3 semantic units: subject, verb, and object. The verb, of course, is. But let's look at this in more detail to identify smaller semantic units. We have, let's look at noun plus adjective. We have Oxford comma, we have serial comma, we have punctuation point, we have passionate debate. In and of itself, these are semantic units. However, we can also look at a larger scale. The Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma. Now we are at the subject level, but in certain sentences, adding 2 combinations of noun plus adjective will not cover all the subject. But here it does. We have our semantic unit here. Let's try this approach on the second sentence. It's that little comma it's that little comma before and in a list of 3 or more items. This is a bit too complex because we have too many short words. Let's look at the next sentence here. In this sentence, where is the verb? We have multiple verbs. We have avoid, could, be, misconstrued. So as an experienced interpreter, I see 3 verbs together and I go, oh my goodness, this has to be the center of my message. This is what is going to separate the subject from the object. I might be wrong, I might be right. Let's break it down into semantic units. We have it, subject, avoids ambiguity. And we have a phrase which starts with when the last item in the list could be misconstrued as part of a previous item. So this is actually our semantic unit here. I was wrong in my assumption that this was the main verb of the sentence. The main verb of the sentence is avoids because the subject is it it avoids? It avoids what? Ambiguity. What ambiguity? Ambiguity when the last item in the list could be misconstrued as part of the previous item. That is our semantic unit, and our rendering must highlight this. Now, obviously, if we were to zoom through, pardon the pun, zoom through our object, ambiguity when the last item in the list could be misconstrued as part of a previous item is not a nice rendering. We're going to look more in detail at that object to break it down into further semantic units. We had ambiguity. We have noun plus adjective. We have a noun. We have prepositions. We have noun plus adjective. So our rendering would be when the last item, last item, in what? The list. We then have our verb cluster here, our three verbs could be misconstrued. And in terms of semantic unit, we would actually have could be misconstrued as part of a previous item. As and part are not a semantic unit here. They are separate. As, it refers to the semantic unit of the verb. Part refers to part of a previous item. So it can be tricky sometimes to clearly identify the semantic units, but nonetheless, we must do this so that we can render them. Now, let's look at the rendering again, the oral punctuation or signposting of the message. We're going to use this in our first paragraph here. We want to render the oral punctuation. So we need to look at the punctuation. We saw we have a full stop here at the end of the sentence. We saw that we have a comma. We can see we have a comma here. We also have a comma here. There are no commas in this sentence, so we will need to look at it in more detail, but we have one here. So we need to, we know that we're going to have to break it into this. We're going to have to highlight that there's a comma here, highlight that there's a comma here, and highlight that there's a full stop here. But furthermore, we want to highlight the fact, for example, we're going to highlight the differences between also known as and the serial comma. To that, and then in our object, we also will do similarly. We will have a punctuation point that ignites. What does it ignite? Passionate debate. We will need to use our intonation to clearly show the limits of each semantic unit. My rendering of this paragraph would be as follows. The Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma, is a punctuation point that ignites passionate debate. It's that little comma before and in a list of 3 or more items. Here we have used rising and falling intonation to separate the different parts of this, to showcase the punctuation. We have used rising and falling intonation to showcase interpretation. Notice how the change in intonation when I hit a comma, the 2 commas here, in this first sentence, how the rising intonation matches the 2 commas and the final point at I forget what it's called, the final point at the end of the sentence. Here is my rendering of this sentence. The Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma, is a punctuation point that ignites passionate debate. The Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma, is a punctuation point that ignites passionate debate. If you've not noticed, commas go up, full stops go down. I repeat, the Oxford comma, also known as the serial comma, is a punctuation point that ignites passionate debate. Let's try this on another sentence. So embrace or banish the Oxford comma, but do it with awareness and clarity. I exaggerated the exclamation mark, but it is an exclamation mark. These sentences are a bit too short to be very illustrative. Maybe this one would be all right. Let's try this one here. We look quickly at the punctuation. Sorry, we have a comma here leading to a multi-million-dollar inheritance dispute. We have a full stop here. It's absent famously changed the meaning of the will, leading, it's too complicated. Let's tell me more in 600 words or less. And see, get longer sentences. Please bear with us while the AI responds. Now we have a nice sentence. Let's look at this one here. We have lots of punctuation in this paragraph. We have a comma, a full stop, the comma, a comma here, a full stop, a comma here on battleground. So we have 3 sentences and about 9 commas and 3 full stops. So here we go, my rendering. The humble comma, that tiny punctuation mark, rarely sparks heated debate. But the Oxford comma, nestled before the and in a list, is a different beast. It's a punctuation battleground, a symbol of style and preference, and a source of endless fascination and frustration. Improvised on the next paragraph. Proponents of the Oxford comma see it as a clarity champion. In lists of 3 or more items, the final comma acts as a fence, preventing the last item from getting tangled up with the one before it. Now, as you may have noticed, I not only marked the full stop and the commas in this text, I also delineated the semantic units so that I could either separate or highlight or contrast or compare or inquire or enumerate. There are examples of highlighting. Here are examples of highlighting through intonation in this one paragraph here. I start. Proponents of the Oxford comma see it as a clarity champion. In a list of 3 or more items, the final comma acts as a fence, preventing the last item from getting tangled up with the one before it. Consider, I invited the baker, the butcher, and my best friend, Sarah. With the comma, Sarah is clearly a separate guest. I invited the baker, the butcher, and my best friend, Sarah. Without the comma, is Sarah the butcher's friend? The ambiguity can be comical, but it can also have real-world consequences. A famous 1975 case in Maine hinged on the Oxford comma, with $1 million inheritance hanging in the balance. Beyond clarity, our pronunciation, not just the Oxford comma, but our enunciation, our control of what we say, and the Oxford comma can add emphasis and rhythm to a list, making it easier to read and understand. In our case, to listen and understand. It's an audible cue, a pause before the grand finale, making the last item stand out. In my intonation, you may have noticed that I finished with stand out, which I isolated and had falling intonation to signal that it's the end of the sentence. It is also the end of this training session. I encourage you to find your own texts and apply what we have seen, in particular, breaking down text into semantic units, and then ensuring that our delivery signposts the structure of the message. I look forward to your attendance to the next session. Thank you very much for your kind attention, and see you soon.